Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me now. It's tough to hear a yes from everyone since everyone was on silent. But I'll assume you can. My name is Neil Pinjay. I serve as the Chief Risk Officer of Commercial Bank of California. We have a lot of risks at the bank, starting from credit risk, financial risk, operational risk, strategic risk, reputational risk. But there is no bigger risk today as in this banking industry than information security risk. Information security is kind of an evolving topic. It never existed a long time ago when, certainly 20, 30 years ago, but certainly it's catching up right now. And some of the information security aspects of the business is being included here. What does information security mean? And the team here is joining us at a good time because this is the National Information Security Awareness Month, where a lot of cyber criminals are now infiltrating government organizations, infiltrating people, infiltrating processes to compromise and extract data from not just financial institutions, but your businesses as well. Things like when you transfer money from one account to the other, things like when you're uploading pictures of your own businesses or for your business purposes or for your financial purposes, things like when you're uploading situations associated with data, all of them are subject to cyber attacks. Yahoo, Facebook, some of the top organizations have already been hacked. Your credit cards have also been hacked. You've seen that Capital One recently was compromised. That's a lot of information that's been going. Here are some of the statistics to make you feel a little aware of the situation. The regulators are essentially informed us that's 238% rise in cyber attacks. 80% of the companies actually detect their attacks. 20% do not even know that they are being attacked. 148% rise in ransomware is being noted, and 600% rise in phishing attempts is being seen. What does my team do? It really focuses on some of the elements that you see on this slide. It focuses on cybersecurity, it focuses on data protection, it focuses on can you go back? Focus on computers, it focuses on mobile devices, information app privacy, and access. There are three elements that they focus on in our entire systems. They focus on customer confidentiality, protecting your sensitive information that's been given to the banks. These would be your social security numbers, your addresses, the integrity associated with each customer. We ensure that there is availability of our financial systems that are always available in spite of having the firewalls, in spite of having the cybersecurity requirements, and we ensure that the bank continues to operate in a safe and sound manner. The same discipline should be applied to your businesses when you look at things, because any compromise from your business would mean financial loss, a reputational loss, or a strategic loss to you in terms of the strategy. Moving on to the next slide, what do we do in information security? I'm sure that comes to mind. We typically focus on three elements of information security: the governance aspects, the risk aspects, and the compliance aspects. Every organization can be included in this chart. It could be from initial, where the organization doesn't have a clue associated with the people, processes, and the technology that it has. Or it could be fully optimized, where it understands the highest security standards, the highest processes, and the highest technology. This is one of the toughest challenges we face at the bank. The higher you put structures around cybersecurity, the more slower the system gets at times. So you have to pick up a sweet spot to ensure how much is too much from a structure. Gone are the days when you only get robbed at gunpoint or people come in and rob you physically. These days, the cyber attackers are working round the clock. They're attacking your systems, they're attacking your computers, your bank accounts, they're trying to target every element that could be compromised. And that could even happen when you're aware during the day or during the night, almost any that 7/24 operation. So the team focuses now on three elements: the governance, the risk, and the compliance aspects of the business, keeping in mind the three most important elements: people, processes, and technologies. So with that in mind, moving on to the next slide, we are going to briefly touch on the three elements of helping the business manage its information security. We as a bank want to help us. We want to help you as our customer and ensure that your businesses are safe, whereby your integrity is also not compromised. Today, we have three participants of my team on information security that would be touching base on security incident response, defensive architecture, vulnerability management, security awareness, These are all new words that come into the industry that we have adopted from the IT. Just as much as information technology is booming, information security is the safeguard elements of the entire architecture. So today we have Kevin Su, who is our information security officer, that will touch base on the governance aspects of the business associated with policies and procedures. We have Levi Allen, that is actually going to be speaking on our network administration and is our network administrator. And we have Hunter Wilson, that essentially focuses on the elements of training and ensuring that the workforce at CBC continues to remain in tip-top shape and is aware of all the information security hackings that are out there, the phishing attacks awareness, as well as the ransomware attack awareness. It's a tough job, and these services are not just available for us as a bank, but we also stand by and remain committed to our customers and are available to help serve you as to answer any of your questions, help your businesses, and ensure that your businesses also operate in a safe and sound manner. Having said that, I would like to, the next part of the presentation, hand it over to Kevin Su. Kevin, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Su. I'm the Information Security Officer at CBC. Today, I'm going to discuss on the topic of information security governance. So the first topic we'll discuss is technology risk assessment. I'm sure you have all heard about the importance of having a risk assessment, but I'll share a story with you that might be more relevant. I was an IT consultant many years ago, and one of the company that I worked for was a tax consultancy. And of course, the information that they hold is important to them, but it's also important for their clients. They have spent a lot of resources in securing their infrastructure, one of which is a monitoring tool that they have placed on the employee's computer. At the time, the purpose of the monitoring tool was to ensure that employees are productive. However, what it also became was a way for us to detect incident. In one of the instances that I observed, where I was responsible for monitoring this tool, I saw an employee exported the entire customer database and put it on a USB drive. Unfortunately, that was a data breach that this firm has experienced, even though we spend a lot of resources in securing the infrastructure. So how can we foresee such an event? This is where a technology risk assessment becomes really helpful, because the first thing in the risk assessment process is really identifying where information is located, how sensitive they are, and then assessing what are the vulnerabilities that can affect these assets. If we would have gone through that exercise, we would have had foreseen that there's a possibility that information can be extracted through the USB drive. So once we identify these issues, we can then establish what are some of the security requirements or controls that we can put to protect the information against a particular vulnerability, and then determine whether there is any sort of residual risk where we can further mitigate and protect the information at hand. And moving on to the next topic, we'll discuss another aspect of governance, which is information security policy and procedures. But I think the most important aspect of policy is probably the acceptable use policy. For those of us who have been working since the 90s or early 2000s, we have received those chain letters. Forward this email to 500 people and you'll receive the blessing for the rest of your life. I'm sure we have all seen that. And unfortunately, sometimes you will also see the person's name as well as the company they work for. Luckily, those chain letters, the traffic has been reduced. And this could be due to the fact that a lot of companies have established an acceptable use policy. What this policy does is really establish what the employee is authorized or unauthorized to use in terms of with business equipment. And at the same time, it also provides a channel for reporting incident A lot of times employees are unaware on what is considered a security incident and therefore is not brought up to IT or whoever manages your IT environment. At the same time, it's sort of establish the usage that I mentioned earlier, what is authorized and what is not authorized in terms of using company equipment. For example, phone system should not be used for an employee's second business after hour. And one of the other aspects with acceptable use policy too is social media. What is the employee allowed to discuss in terms of any sort of information related to the company that they work for? Are they allowed to use the logo? Are they allowed to discuss internal company business that might not be public and such? And the very last piece is compliance. Are there any disciplinary actions associated with a breach of the acceptable use policy? Over to the next slide, I'll discuss a quote that I found in a recent survey of 500 security and risk leaders. Nearly half of the security leaders said that their incident response team were not sure about when to engage legal counsel. And this happens quite frequently. I have personally seen where a company has written a 100-page incident response policy, but when a suspected event occurs, a false positive event, it turns out, where a security breach did not happen, the IT folks at the time have already engaged the forensic team, which is outsourced to a service provider. And this cost them money, unfortunately, because the IT team, they had the plan, but they weren't trained and they weren't testing the plan. So nobody were aware of the actual processes. So moving on to the next slide, I'll discuss what you should expect to see in an incident response plan. The one that we use at CBC is quite comprehensive, but I'll refer you to a resource from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Last year, they have issued a ransomware guide, and they did a pretty good job because it discussed multiple topics in relation to ransomware, but more importantly, they actually have a step-by-step process on how to respond to such incident. And there are three major components in this incident response plan. The first step is detection and analysis, which includes isolating the infected system, but also prioritizing what to restore first. And part of this step is where you also engage other members of the incident response team, perhaps the marketing folks, of course, the executives, and maybe even informing the board. The second step is containment and eradication. This is where you collect evidence and examine them. Perhaps you'll be contacting law enforcement and other regulatory bodies if you are being governed by various government agencies. Also identifying the accounts that got breached and start rebuilding the system free of the malware or backdoor. And the very last step is the recovery and post-incident activity. Once you restore the system, make sure the bad actors can't get in anymore, then you reconnect the system back online. But the most important aspect in this stage is probably the lessons learned. What can you learn from this experience? Can we do better next time if you experience such attack? And now I'm going to turn it over to Levi Allen. He's our Director of Security Operations.
Thank you, Kevin. Hello, my name is Levi Allen, Director of Security Operations. Thank you for your time this morning. Again, like Neil said, it's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we're going to be covering some nice ransomware, anti-ransomware tips that you guys can use in your business. That's going to be hopefully very useful. We're going to be going into a little bit in detail, and some features that we're going to touch on are a little bit more for a little bit larger organizations also, but we're going to also cover 6 that will basically be applicable to your business. A census-wide study out of about 1,200 security professionals said, among the enterprises that gave into ransomware demands, 4 or 5 were hit a second time. And what that's been telling us in the industry is that companies that have given into ransomware demands, and even if they haven't, the bad guys are going to go after them again because the word is out on the street, they got hit, they're easy to basically get into, and most of the time they're going to get hit repeatedly in a short period of time. The cases, like with Pitney Bowes this last year, they got hit twice within 7 months. The first time they got knocked over a few times, lost some at where we had to restore their data. The second time they didn't get hit as bad, as they were obviously taking more preventative measures, but unfortunately the word on the street, people knew that they were an easy target and they went after them again. So if you get hit, most likely you're going to get hit again. So we can go on to the next slide, which I'm going to cover and then go into more details about 6 top anti-ransomware tips that you can use for your business that will hopefully cut down your risk of being compromised. First one that's going to be most important is going to be using a spam filter. Now, Barracuda Networks, basically it's a mail gateway appliance and now service. I said between 75 and 90% of targeted cyber attacks start with an email. So most of the time, the bad guys are getting in the door just by sending you a friendly little email that says, hey, click on me. And unfortunately, your traditional spam filters that are signature based, they're only looking for a pattern or a virus, and they're not going to block a lot of the modern day spear phishing attempts that are basically going to try to redirect you to a malicious site or try to trick you into downloading or exploiting something. So on the next slide, we can describe pretty much our modern spam filters are using AI, basically machine learning. So they're going to be looking at emails a lot more meticulously just on, okay, who is it coming from? Have I seen this person before? Have I seen this message before? Have I, in the threat community, have I seen things similar to this or bad websites? So a lot of this analytical data is going to come together with machine learning to basically make a prediction at the end and say, hey, is this a bad thing or is this something I'm going to pass through? And this is why you're going to need a modern spam filter that's going to be using typically a cloud service for this. So on the next slide, next thing you'll be able to do, and this is something you're going to have to do on a monthly basis, is update your software regularly. Now, we call it Black Tuesday, or the second Tuesday of the month is Microsoft Patch Tuesday. And other software vendors have also got in that, like Adobe, and typically you'll see a Chrome update that'll be released too. But you're going to basically need to update your software monthly. And Kaspersky said, hey, if you update your software, your risk of hacking is going to go down by 30%. So it's in your best interest to patch and patch and patch your software. But part of this process is you're going to have to identify what updates are critical to your environment, because you're going to have 100+ patches a month that are going to come down the pipe, and you're going to say, hey, what's important? So one, you're going to need to find out what's out there, and that's where a vulnerability scanner is going to help you. And you can find one from either Qualys or Nessus, and they'll tell you, hey, you've got this misconfiguration or you're missing this patch. And therefore, you're going to then go out and say, hey, now I got to make sure our software is up to date. So you're going to need a patch management software. Now, I highly recommend you don't have one that's basically a vulnerability scanner and a patch management system. I recommend you actually have 2 separate ones so that they actually check each other and don't misreport on itself. So, and if you need, you can get a free externally vulnerability scan from the CISA website, and that's on the URL included below. Moving on to the next thing you should be looking at is, and this kind of goes more into a larger environment, is you'll have alerting coming into your organization from all your various systems, whether it's your firewall, your antivirus, your whatever application that's throwing alerts to you. You're going to just basically be inundated with alerts. And a lot of the surveys said, hey, a lot of security professionals get over 500 alerts a day, but nearly almost 80% of them are only be able to investigate about 20 at most per day, which means there's a whole bunch of them that they're not getting looked at, and potentially the bad guys are slipping in through the door. So if you're basically short on staff and you don't have enough people in your organization to look through hundreds of alerts a day, this is where you're going to want to look as a service. So on the next slide, you can look at what's called, actually I jumped ahead myself. An EDR solution will help you with this also, but I was going to say a SOC as a service will help you. Now, in case you don't know what an EDR solution is, it's endpoint detection response. This is a replacement for your traditional antivirus. Traditionally, you're looking at McAfee, Symantec, or hopefully you guys have Bitdefender out there. That is going to be your traditional AV. Now, with an EDR solution, it's no longer signature-based. It's actually looking at heuristic-based. It's looking at how does the application or the behavior of the software on the system behave, and is that malicious? So this is a lot more, much more in depth, and can actually identify your zero-day exploits and basically vulnerabilities that don't have signatures for. Not to mention, you can also get blacklisting and whitelisting, so you can look at processes and places that you want to go to. Next slide is what I was alluding to earlier, which is basically SOC as a service or Security Operations Center as a service. In case you don't have an army of IT or InfoSec individuals to basically be looking at your environment, you can actually outsource this function to a team that actually will do this for you. Because the internet never sleeps, but you have to. Therefore, these people and their teams provide you 24/7, 365 monitoring to look at your environment, monitor the alerts, and in the event they do see something that's not right, they can take the response and act on your behalf. This is really nice so that you don't get these midnight calls saying that, hey, something's funky going on. Therefore, you got a team always keeping eyes on the situation. Next slide. Another big thing that you should be doing, and if you're not, should be implementing if you can, use multi-factor authentication. Again, multi-factor authentication is going to be that additional layer of authentication to your traditional just username and password. You'll probably have seen this maybe with Google or another banking application that you have where it'll send you a text message, or it has an application that has a one-time token that gives you a 6-digit PIN. You're going to want to implement this on as many things as possible, specifically front door or front access devices like VPNs. In the case for like the Colonial Pipeline, and I'm going to be picking on them today, they were compromised on their VPN devices just because they had an inactive account that didn't have multi-factor authentication on. Therefore, they were able to brute force in, they got in on those credentials, and because MFA wasn't on, they got right in, and the rest is history. So, next slide. Now, with multi-factor, you want to basically have a strong password with it. Now, if you have a good strong password, the attack surface and likelihood is going to go down considerably. Now, the challenge becomes for most organizations is you're going to have a dozen websites, if not many, that are going to need separate credentials for username and password, and then you're going to have your MFA authenticator on top of it. Instead, most enterprises or organizations, if they can basically start to implement what's called single sign-on or SSO. This helps you basically reduce the amount of passwords you have to memorize and instead use a single set of passwords, and ideally with multi-factor authentication, to pass the authentication onto your other apps. And typically, most organizations are doing this with Azure single sign-on. Next slide. Lastly, what's most important and almost always overlooked is backing up your data. You have to plan for the day that you're going to have to recover from backup nowadays. And unfortunately, we always live that we're thinking, hey, nothing's ever going to go down, the hard drive's never going to fail, or something's never going to get deleted. Nowadays, the likelihood is ransomware is going to get your data. So we want to make sure you back up your data. Now, we don't care typically how you do it, as long as you start doing it. That could be from an external device, such as a USB hard drive. You could back it up to a network share that's on a server that you know that's getting backed up. You can basically also get a cloud service, like Google has their G Drive, and you can also have stuff in Azure if you want to do blob storage. You can basically put it anywhere that you want. The ideal is you have a backup, preferably off-site, so in case anything goes down on-site, it will be offsite that you can recover from. And if possible, try to encrypt your backups just in case someone gets a hold of them and is going to look into them, which you don't want. Next slide. The last thing, once you've got your backups, it was most important. Could you progress to the next slide? Test your backups. And I'm picking on Colonial Pipeline again, because the CEO, Joseph Blount, explained why he decided to pay the ransomware during the congressional hearing. At the time the ransomware was made, Blount said it wasn't clear how widespread the intrusion was or how long it would take Colonial Pipeline to restore the compromised systems. So Blount decided to pay the ransom, hoping it would speed up the recovery time. And unfortunately, it did not. So for what's important here is now that you've got backups, test your backups, make sure they work, and most importantly, know how long it's going to take you to recover, because you can have all your data backed up, but if it's going to take you a month to recover your data, that may not work out for your business. So make sure your recovery time is achievable and is obtainable. So next slide. Lastly, try to block unreliable websites. The internet's a big bad place, and if you can filter out the bad places, more power to you. And there's some services that can help you do this. Typically, you're going to want some type of content filtering. Normally that can be on your firewall or a service such as Zscaler. Another free service that's out there is called OpenDNS, or DNS Domain Name Services. That's a service that basically translates your Google, basically whatever URL address and translate it to the IP address. OpenDNS allows you to pretty much do filtering at the DNS level without having to implement content filtering by saying, hey, bad sites that we know about, we're just not going to resolve, so we're never going to get there. Another way for content filtering, as I alluded earlier, an EDR solution can do website content filtering, such as Bitdefender Gravity Zone. That's another great one that can do some content filtering at the endpoint. If not, you can always do it on your firewall. And you want to try to block hacking sites, scams, software piracy, fraud, phishing, and any other bad stuff. Because typically at the bad sites, it's going to creep in malware, and if not, ransomware. So if you can block it at the site, it's going to basically protect you that much more. And if possible, and it's not mentioned on here, on your firewalls, geo-blocking is your friend. Geo-blocking is basically the term of being able to block other countries based off of their IP. Now, for us in CBC, we do most of our business in the US, if not only in the US. Therefore, we have no business really talking to anybody outside of the world. And if your business is like that, it makes sense to cut down the rest of the internet to say, hey, I don't need to talk to China. Therefore, we're going to block China and Russia, and they don't need to get into my network because I have no business going to China or them coming into my network. So geo-blocking can be a real saver in terms of the amount of malicious traffic trying to find its way into your environment. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hunter, and he's going to basically go cover training. Hunter, I think you're still muted.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Hunter Wolfson. I am the Information Security Analyst here at Commercial Bank of California. I handle a lot of our training and awareness program, as well as our mock phishing training program. Can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. CBC has invested a great deal of time, energy, and money into a training awareness program simply because we're a financial institution and the stakes couldn't be higher. Millions of dollars being moved around daily. It's very important for people to understand what they're protecting and how they can do so. At the end of the day, humans are always going to be the weakest part of the cybersecurity chain. And more often than not, the most simple and effective thing you can do is make sure that your people are properly trained, and that training is done continuously throughout the year. The truth of the matter is, the strongest environment that you can imagine with the best controls that Levi just mentioned can be bypassed by a user clicking on a link in an email nowadays. And that's what's really scary, especially when 75 to 90% of all cyber attacks are coming in through via email. Nowadays you really can't turn on the news without cybersecurity popping up, seeing the latest hack, seeing Colonial Pipeline, seeing what happened with the woman on Shark Tank, Barbara Corcoran, where one of her assistants clicked on a link that was sent over and ended up wiring a bunch of money to a fraudster. So name of the game, stay out of the news. A good way to do that is to maintain a solid security posture within your company. The three best ways to do so, and often most simple ways, are going to be implementing an annual training that goes out to your employees, whether that's through a system like we used KnowBe4 to kind of automate that training and track it for auditing purposes. You want to keep up on awareness, so that could be something as simple as sending out a weekly, monthly email on kind of hot topics. Here's what's going on in the threat landscape, just so your employees understand and you understand what the threats are, what to look for. And last, we'll be implementing, we also use KnowBe4 for this, a phishing training implementation by which the system will create mock phishing emails, fake phishing emails that go out to employees. And you can track results from that and kind of see where you are from a baseline and try to improve from there. Annual training that I mentioned, the first item, should cover phishing, ransomware, security policies specific to your company, how to create a strong password, everything, and you cover your bases at all costs. As I mentioned, this can often be the simplest way to protect your business from what's out there. If we could please move on to the next slide. So this is an example of an implementation like KnowBe4 that we use, but there are plenty out there that facilitate training and awareness. So what you're looking at here is in the first quarter, before a program like KnowBe4 was put out with a company, the average was around 31.4 to 35% of users being phish prone. And what that means is that 35% of users will initially click on a mock phishing email when it comes out, which means more often than not, they'll click on the real thing, which will compromise your security, which will compromise your company. Fast forward to quarter two in this model, you're seeing that drop by about half, and then 3 and 4, you're seeing that drop half and then half again. We've seen great success with a system like KnowBe4 in our environment. And it just goes to show and highlight the importance of maintaining a strong security training and awareness posture within your business. And with that, I will hand it back to Danielle to wrap up. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Neil, Kevin, Levi, Hunter. Thank you all for that great information. For you and your business, hopefully there was some piece of information depending on wherever you're at in your information security journey. Maybe you're where Kevin mentioned and you're ready to do a risk assessment and identify that information and those vulnerabilities and proceed forward with creating an acceptable use policy for your organization. Or maybe you're just starting out and the tips that Levi provided are going to be extremely helpful in taking it step by step, first building that spam filter and going from there. And then as Hunter said, even with implementing all of these different policies or procedures, of course, we urge you to continually be training and testing not only your environment, but also your users and your organization. Because as Hunter mentioned, if you could have the best environment possible, you could have all of the gates built, all the walls there, but if you have a user that clicks on a malicious link, that could all come tumbling down in an instant. So thank you again for all of that wonderful information. We are now going to open it up for questions and answers. So first we're going to go to our chats. Julie, do we have any chats on our, do we have any chat questions?
Hi, Danielle. We have one question asking if we're going to share the PowerPoint, the presentation.
Absolutely. We will share the PowerPoint as well as the recording of the session once we're fully concluded. So you should get that in your email here later today, maybe tomorrow, depending on the size of the recording. Okay, so then now if we have no more chat questions, we'll go ahead and open it up for the rest of the group. How this is going to work is at the bottom of your screen, there will be a little hand icon. If you click on that, you're digitally raising your hand to go ahead and ask a question. Once we see that hand is raised, we'll go ahead and unmute your microphone so you can ask your question for our information security team. So if there are any questions, go ahead and use that hand icon to ask those of our team now.
Danielle, it's Julie. If I may interrupt, I have one more question in the chat.
Oh, sure.
How does this affect people working from home using their personal computer?
That's a great question. Kevin, would you like to take that, or would you like?
No problem. If possible, we recommend not allowing user to use their personal device, because essentially you can't really control the security requirements on these computers. There have tools in place by Microsoft and others where you can implement certain policy with personal devices. For example, Microsoft has a product called Intune where they will ensure that the computer connecting to the environment has password control, it has anti-malware software or antivirus software in place before they're allowed into the environment. So there are tools out there, but if possible, we highly discourage using personal devices to connect into the environment.
Great. Hopefully that answered whichever individual submitted that chat. If you want to ask another question, feel free to chat it over or use that raise hand icon, and we'd be happy to unmute your mic so we can hear your question for the group. Okay, well, I don't see any raised hands, correct, Julie? Okay.
Correct, Danielle.
Thank you. And we don't have any other chat questions at this time. So maybe later today you'll be rewatching this presentation, or if something comes across your mind, feel free to email the CX team at cxteam@cbcal.com. We are Commercial Bank of California's client experience team, and we have hosted this session for you today. And we're more than happy to get you connected to the correct resource or answer those questions in partnership with our information security team. So feel free to send us over questions, or if you have any comments or additional feedback, we'd love to hear it. So send it over to that email address. You should also see it on your screen. Other than that, I believe that concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.